This is episode 30 of Hardly Qualified, on death, for August 16th, 2013. Have you ever sat around in a pub and chatted into the wee hours of the night? Ever considered the world in ways you've never before thought about, and then shared it with your friends? Welcome to Hardly Qualified, a weekly podcast recorded in Calgary, Alberta, where Will Connor and his friend Ducky get together to wax philosophical about whatever suits their fancy. With the occasional guest, they discuss society and culture, following random threads of thought wherever they may lead. So pull up a chair, grab a drink, and join the conversation, because you never know, you might be hardly qualified too. Let's get started.
Afternoon, kids, and welcome to episode 30 of Hardly Qualified.
Yay, 30.
30. This is
We're in our 30s.
Yeah, this is an emergency broadcast, I think. Episode 30 was supposed to be our feminism episode, but we're going to push it for a week because we have an important topic we want to talk about.
Yeah. Death and dying and things related to it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's, for those of you who have been following the podcast for the year, you've probably realized that it's been a bit of a rough year for myself. I had to put down a cat at the beginning of the year. That really sucked. And then we lost Earl. Earl hung himself. Then my grandmother died. Yeah, Earl Silverman, yeah. And then my grandmother passed away to liver cancer. And today is Wednesday, so then this is going out on Friday. And on Tuesday,
Which
yesterday.
was yesterday, yeah.
God, it feels so much longer than that. One of my cousins committed suicide. So it's been a rough year, death-wise, I guess. And I don't know. I mean, we talked about skipping an episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just didn't really want to. The podcast is kind of like a chronicle almost of what we're thinking about throughout the year and
like a journal.
Whatnot. Yeah. And gives us an opportunity to discuss, what it is we're thinking about and what's going on in our lives or society. And one of the things that maybe we don't talk enough about in our culture is death and dying. We almost seem to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, in some sense that kind of sounds obvious, but I mean, we always see it as a bad thing, and I think there used to be a time when that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, a lot of the way things happen is people, because death is the great barrier, right? That's the black wall upon or beyond which we can't see, right? And because of that, we have a lot of sort of myths and stories to help assuage our ignorance of what's beyond. Because a lot of people, like almost everybody, fears death. And it's not so much that they fear being dead, it's that we as a society, we as a species, has this fear of the unknown. Right. And death is the ultimate barrier of knowledge. We do not know what lies in wait for us on the other side, if anything at all. And that's why we as a culture for the last 10,000 years, and perhaps even earlier, have sort of developed these stories and ideas and plans and thoughts about what becomes of us after our body dies, after our body stops working, to try to provide comfort. And, and a lot of people don't want to talk about that, because if you think about it too much, it's really easy just to see how empty and hollow that comfort really is.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Obviously I've been hearing a lot of things from different family members over the last...
Has anybody told you that he's in a better place?
No, nobody has said that,
Oh, okay.
But I've heard things like, his grandma and his aunts were there with him when he killed himself, and, they escorted him to heaven and everything.
Yeah, see, that's still... I don't want to presume to think about, or I don't want to presume to talk about how you feel, but if I were in your position, I would find that infuriatingly offensive.
I know where it comes from. It comes from an attempt to make sense of, like you said, of death and dying, and to offer comfort and consolation. I don't share that. I'm very much a, from stardust to stardust, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was, Richard Dawkins who said that I'm not too concerned with the eternity after death because I wasn't too concerned with the eternity before birth.
Yeah, I don't think it was Richard Dawkins. I know which quote you're talking about. That you did. I don't remember being dead before I was born, so I'm not concerned with being dead after I die.
Right.
So, and that's a really good way to look at it too, because if we recognize that birth is the beginning of our existence and death is the end of our existence, that finite time in between provides us with a chance and the opportunity to influence our setting, to have an impact on the people around us. And I think that rather than being so concerned with where we're going after we die, we probably would be better off spent being concerned with the place we're leaving behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there are good deaths and there are bad deaths, and I don't know, maybe it's just a romantic notion to me, but I feel that if you lived a good life and you left the place cleaner and better than the way you found it, that is where the comfort comes from when I die. That the people around me will be able to look around and say, this is the impact that Ducky had. Right? And it's the comfort isn't that mommy and daddy will be waiting for him in heaven, or that aunt and uncle will be there to escort him across to the other side. To me, that's all hollow. That's just hollow platitudes. The important thing, I think, is what you leave behind, your legacy. Right? And I don't know if that's hubris talking, but I think that's how you judge whether or not somebody's lived a good life, whether or not would things have been different had that person not been there.
Well, that I agree. That leads to its own issues and people chasing legacies.
Yeah.
Right. But there's not too much you can do about that, I suppose. When it comes to death, in terms of my personally, my thoughts on it, I don't know. You have to forgive me. I've been up for 2 days. I haven't slept. So my brain has been fuzzy. I know I promised that I'd bring it with me this time around, but psych.
Tricked ya.
You'll have to tune in next week. What was I going to say? Oh, right. So personally, I'm not too worried about dying. I mean, dying, the process of dying, in so much that it's more than we're doing day to day, like, sitting and rotting or being afflicted by a disease or something. That can be terrifying.
Yeah.
But
the process of death, but the concept of being dead.
Yeah. I mean, death is really a problem for the living.
Yeah.
my cousin's dead, and his death doesn't concern him anymore. He no longer has an opinion or any power to do anything about it, or any capability to have any thoughts or feelings regarding it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the rest of us that have to cope, and it's been hard, that's for sure. Suicide is something that we don't really talk a lot about either.
Well,
and
as a society, or do you mean us as a podcast?
Well, we've never really talked about it. I mean, we talked about it with Earl, but...
Well, we talked a little bit with the assisted suicide episode too, so...
That's true. That's true.
But...
And, I'm still of the opinion that if people want to take their life, that's their right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a difference between doing it impulsively and with thoughtful consideration and communication. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, that's kind of the distinction here. So,
do you want to talk about what happened to your cousin in specific?
Well, he's been kind of...
I mean, if you want to keep it generalized, that's fine. I don't need to...
Yeah, he's been kind of sad for, like, the last year or so anyway. And he got into a fight with his brother and then ended up hanging himself yesterday. And, his mom found him. My aunt found him. And so it kind of came out of the blue. It's not like he'd been threatening or, giving stuff away. There are a lot of hints, I guess, or a lot of signs that somebody is contemplating or planning suicide, or has suicidal ideation. First, they might say, "I'm going to kill myself." That's always a really good sign that they're thinking about it. They could start, a lot of times they might start giving things away. Or they start calling friends and family and saying, "I'm sorry," I love you, and please forgive me. Kind of those odd, weird phone calls that seem a little out of place until you realize that they were final words to a particular loved one, right? Those are pretty good signs. And it's easy to overlook them, especially if we're not aware of them. The giving stuff away is definitely a really big one. People talking about it, people being depressed and withdrawn and whatnot. But this wasn't really so much. He wasn't really so much out of character in terms of he was always kind of quiet and demure and, well, in context, I suppose, right? Anyway, it blindsided everyone. There weren't many people who could have possibly raised a flag, and we've talked with a lot of people in the last 24 hours. And it's hard to know why, and there's kind of a search for answers, and the answers will never come. You can only make guesses. And maybe if you had answers, then you could, for motivations, you could assign blame and take responsibility and punish yourself or punish others. But
that could be like one of the benefits of a suicide note, I suppose. Provides closure to the people around you.
Maybe. That's assuming that that a note would be coherent and thoughtful and everything. He didn't leave one that at least we can find or tell. And I've talked to a few people who have had friends that have committed suicide that have left notes, and some of them have been incoherent. Other ones have blamed people. But ultimately, anyone who dies by their own hand does so out of their own free will. whether or not they feel they have no other choice, that's something completely different.
Well, it brings to mind something that I read recently. I can't remember where I read it, and I can't remember if it was fiction or if it was a news article or something, but one of the characters in the piece was talking about how he had talked to many people who had tried to kill themselves and failed, and how they had jumped off bridges or had cut their wrists or had done something that wouldn't kill them instantly. And as soon as they took that step, he said that nearly to a person they all regretted it afterwards. And the only reason we don't see people regretting it who succeed is because they can't fix it, they can't come back from it. Right? So it kind of makes me wonder whether or not suicide is an action that really sort of inspires regret whenever it's done. I've never been suicidal. I've never really contemplated it. It's hard to sort of imagine that mindset, but it always seems to me that if you're being suicidal, or if you have sort of the intent or the wish or are contemplating suicide, that it's hard to do in cold blood. Right?
Okay.
So maybe that's why suicide notes are incoherent, and because you have to I don't know, I don't know how to articulate what I'm thinking, but it's like maybe you have to be crazy in order to want to kill yourself.
One of the things my mom said last night, and my mom's a social worker, so she spent her entire life in social work. Well, maybe not her entire life. There was a point where she was an infant, I suppose. Maybe, I don't know, I wasn't there, I could be wrong. But, as long as I remember, her professional career has been in social work, and I trained in social work for a while. I did 3 years as a telephone crisis counselor at the Distress Center in Calgary, doing suicide intervention and whatnot. And so, I kind of get a lot of this. I know the theory behind suicide, if you will. And one of the things that my mom mentioned that kind of popped out for me was, she said that when people are in the act of completion of suicide, that they are in a similar mental state to being insane, in that they're not aware of their impact on other people. They're not necessarily even aware of what they're doing physically.
So it's like a form of dissociation?
Yeah, exactly.
Which kind of makes sense, because we have a hard wire in our system not to hurt ourselves. We've got that instinct for self-preservation. So it kind of makes sense that you would have to have some kind of mechanism to bypass that sort of sense of self-preservation, right? It's hard to be rational and choose to kill yourself at the same time.
I would think so. Unless we're talking euthanasia again, which is maybe a little different.
Euthanasia, assisted suicide, I think, is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas because there was a distinction we drew last time, is that a euthanasia is when somebody else decides to kill you because you're not.
Right. Fair enough.
But that kind of turns around. That's one of the questions that I have about suicide intervention, is that sometimes, I don't know, it seems to be that with suicide intervention, the assumption is that suicide is always bad, right? And that it is the job of the suicide intervener, right, the assistant counselor or whatever, to talk the person out of killing themselves, him or herself. What if suicide is the right answer? What if suicide is a right answer? can suicide be a good answer? Like,
well, let me answer that in two parts. So, as a crisis intervention counselor, how we're trained is that people who are suicidal are often locked in a narrow-minded, narrow vision. They're not seeing the resources. They are afraid of family. They're kind of stuck in this cycle that they can't break out of, right? And so when you're practicing suicide intervention, what you're trying to do is broaden that person's perception of where they are in the world and what's available to them as an individual in terms of getting help, their social structure, people that they can rely on, people that love them, would support them, so on and so forth, right? When people are suicidal, they're generally feeling incredibly isolated and out of control. A lot of them might feel that they're a burden to themselves or others. And, we talk about suicide being a selfish act. And a lot of the times it's not. A lot of the times people who do it, they want to, yes, stop suffering, but they also want to stop causing suffering on their social group and their support systems. Now, so that's kind of the theory part of it. The call that kind of goes to the second part of your question is kind of the one that ended my career in social work. I received this phone call, and probably about 8 months, not even 6 months later, I was done. I quit. And I was talking with this one lady who had called in, and she was suicidal. She had been before. She had medical problems in which she was unable to find any sort of resolution. And the reason why she was calling, yes, she was suicidal, but one of the things that we do with people is we contract with them. We make them promise that if they're thinking of harming themselves or committing suicide, that they will reach out to a suicide center or the authorities or to somebody who's aware of what's going on and talk to them, to give that one last opportunity type of thing to be talked down. And so she had been contracted by the psych services at the hospital to call if she was suicidal again. And she was very adamant that that's why she was calling, that she needed to live up to her word, but there was nothing that I could do to
change her mind.
To change her mind. And we talked for an incredibly long time, and I tried every intervention and tool and strategy in the book that I had. And really, at one point she said to me, she's like, I thank you for what you're trying to do. I understand what you're trying to do, but you don't understand my life. You don't understand what it's like to be in this body and not having to be able to have it fixed. And I just can't deal with this anymore. And eventually she did actually complete on the phone with me. Which rarely happens, but it did, and it really threw me for a loop.
Wait, you mean she actually killed herself while she was talking to you on the phone?
Yeah.
Oh.
And it happens, at least in Calgary, about once a year. That happens. The completion to a volunteer out of thousands and thousands of calls. So it's incredibly rare, but it does happen. And I knew as the counselor that I had done everything that I could. I had offered every resource. I had done kind of every trick in the bag type of thing. But then I realized that, what? She was right. Ultimately, it's her decision. Who am I to say that she could have a better life? She'd clearly taken every bone that we'd thrown her and found that it wasn't working.
Yeah, because there's got to be some sort of sense of rationality if they're contacting assisted suicide helplines or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that really changed my outlook on, like I said, people's right to live and to choose to live. Up until that point, I had thought, no, suicide is absolutely always wrong. And at that point, I couldn't make that judgment anymore. Because for her, that was, absolutely the right decision at the time. She was convinced. She'd even convinced me. And I wasn't willing to be convinced. So, and maybe there could be some other intervention that would have worked that we hadn't thought of or anything else. But at some point, you become exhausted of life and exhausted of being a burden on your family and whatnot, and society and services. And I'd like to think that I could always walk away and start over again, and I think most people could. We have, I was talking to Karen about this last night, and she said that we have this perseverance that's built into us, this insane desire to thrive no matter our condition. And maybe what's so confusing about suicide is those who contemplate it, but even those who do it, lose that. And that's so foreign to us because, humans will work in the most hostile conditions that our body will tolerate with, tremendous amounts of abuse and poor standards of living, and maybe even happy about it, or, content or whatever, right? Or if not, just resigned to it. But people who complete suicide have obviously lost that ability to persevere. And maybe that's what's foreign to us.
Do you think it's just an aspect of hopelessness?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I was younger, as a youngster and an adolescent growing up, I'd always wondered, like I'd never really had experience with suicides or death. I had never felt suicidal. I didn't know anybody who had committed suicide or who had felt suicidal. I'd never talked to anybody who was suicidal. It was all sort of an abstract concept, and most of the exposure I had to suicide was in media, was in fiction and stories about people who were just sick of fighting and they would give up. There's sort of the two versions of suicide. There was the I can't take it anymore, I'm going to be done with it, and the my death. The buddy who jumps on a grenade to save his teammates, right? Buddy who, the guys at the movie theater, the shooting in Colorado, who jumped in front of the bullets so that their girlfriends would stay alive, right? Self-sacrifice. That kind of. Those were the two aspects of suicide, and I always felt that killing yourself because you couldn't handle what was going on was incredibly selfish and cowardly, and that killing yourself as a way to protect somebody else was the exact opposite, was that it was selfish or selfless and quite heroic. I've come to realize that suicide itself, I've always seen, there's this sort of idea, like you said, that we seem to see suicide as a selfish act, but there's also that sort of, it's a coward's act, it's the easy way out, that if you're going to kill yourself so you don't have to deal with your hardships, that's just being a crybaby wuss, right? But sometimes the commitment and the act of suicide itself has to take incredible courage. So I don't know. It's hard to kind of hold to that sort of absolute that killing yourself to get away from hardship is an act of cowardice, right?
Well, and it may not even be a deliberate act.
Like, what do you mean?
Going back to that disassociative state, right? So, in the situation of my cousin, I couldn't sleep. I was up all night, and I just kind of lay in my bed trying to figure out. Well, we'll call it a bed. It's actually a blanket on my grandfather's floor in his storage room, but whatever. Yeah, all spare beds in the family in the city are taken for obvious reasons. So I volunteered to take the floor. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I was sitting there, lying there, and I was trying to piece it all together and trying to understand how this could have happened, how he could have came to it. And I wrote, I guess some people have called it a poem, some people call it an essay, whatever, I don't know. And I just kind of want to share it because, one, I think it actually explains what happened. Obviously, we can never know. But two, I think it kind of captures maybe the essence of the thought process, and that it's not as deliberate as we may think. So I'm going to read it, and then we'll come back and talk. So I called it the happy business of dying. To say there was a plan or intent gives too much credit. His plans were more eloquent, more wonderful, more daring. He wasn't quite sure how he ended up here. Like most things in life, it just kind of happened that way. His intentions never quite bloomed, never bore any fruit worth preserving. He wasn't sure why or how it worked out like that. He tried to be great. He tried to be the one that made it, the one who escaped, who succeeded, who flourished. He was an artist, a gamer, a storyteller. His imagination was rich and varied, was drenched in a creative passion he could never quite harness. He was destined for a university, to be a degreed man, competent and capable. But it kind of just didn't happen that way. He lay in anguish on the couch, fighting the pain in his mind as he wrestled with the timeline, trying to figure out how he got there instead of here. How is it he managed to be the guy that struck one he loved? The guy that blew into a rage and harmed his best friend, his brother? How, he wondered, did it happen? Where did he miss the turn in his life? Where could he have zigged instead of zagged? It wasn't him. He wasn't the type. Or he wasn't supposed to be. He was a gifted kid, a true friend, the one others could depend on. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. It just kind of happened that way. There were opportunities, he realized. Opportunities that would now be missed as he sat and waited while time mercilessly dragged him into his destruction. His appointment with the courts loomed, and he knew that he would have to answer for his failure to excel, for his failure to be exceptional, for his failure to be great. He would stand and be judged, accused of being someone he wasn't, and would be made to account for the actions of the man he had never intended to become. Then he would be one of those people, with a record, a history, always under suspicion of passing police, denied at every border he tried to vacation across, scrutinized by every employer for a mistake they would never understand, because he didn't himself. He was now to be a burden on his family, his society, and himself. This wasn't the future he had planned. He was going to be a success, a triumph of creative will and familial passion. But it kinda just didn't happen that way. He found himself detoured from the interview he was to attend. Success couldn't come to him when he had these new demons to fight, this new brand to display. He tried to make sense of the world before him, how he would survive jail, how he would survive the looks of scorn and disappointment on his family's face, how he would cope with being a criminal, another societal reject. Like so much in his life that went sideways, he couldn't comprehend how he ended up here, with the noose around his neck. He didn't want to be a burden. He didn't want to continue to hurt. He had no clue what to do, how to apologize, to make it right, to stop the barreling train of misery that entered his life. He didn't want to die. It kinda just happened that way. Kinda just happened that way.
Seems to be the way of things, doesn't it?
Yeah. You know.
How many of us really follow a life plan? Right? How many preparations and intentions do we have that actually follow the outline to the letter? Right?
You get sidetracked and things don't go your way, and you make one too many stupid mistakes, and you don't recognize who you are anymore, right? That's kind of the sense I got just from talking to family and whatnot about where he'd ended up, and I don't honestly believe that he'd put a lot of thought into it. He just ended up there without a plan, and I mean, there's the deliberate action, obviously, the physical action, but that doesn't mean that, it's kind of like when you're driving or you're walking and your mind's off somewhere else and you're contemplating life or whatever issue is bothering you, and then you realize, like, holy shit, how did I get, like, home? I don't remember even leaving, really.
Do it all on autopilot.
Yeah, So, anyway, that's it's a possibility. How it could have gone down. We'll never really know, but I think it's too easy to say that suicide is a selfish act. Maybe it's also somebody trying to spare others misery. I mean, we say that's not a good enough reason.
Well, a lot of the time that sort of perception is also false, right? That, especially for loved ones, that sometimes they would prefer the burden of you being there rather than the absence of you not. Does that make sense?
Right. Yep.
Right? So, I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's definitely the sentiment in my family right now.
It's nothing I can really relate to. Like, I don't get emotional about very many things, so it's hard for me to sort of empathize with being suicidal, right? Because I've never been there. I've never even remotely been there, right? So,
we're going to talk about mental health and psychiatry and psychology. Kind of, it's on the list of future episodes, so I'm not going to get into it too much.
Well, this is a Will's catharsis episode, so.
What I posted on Facebook this morning was pretty much like just letting people know where I was and what was up. My friends and family, well, my friends anyway, my family knew. And what I said was, just make sure that the people in your life know that you're there for them. It never hurts to just text them or call them and say, you know what, I know we haven't talked in a week, a month, a year, whatever. We don't have to start now, but if things are so bad, call me, stop by, make that commitment, make that contract.
I'm gonna say something really crass here.
Okay.
What if you don't care?
Well, then don't make the commitment. Don't make the call, right? I mean, we all have people in our social groups that are kind of on the periphery of our...
So I used to have an ex-girlfriend who threatened to kill herself all the time, and after a while I just got to the point where I was like, fucking do it already. And like,
right.
Yeah, even now, to this day, I mean, if she were to just call me up out of the blue and say, you know what, I'm really struggling with the will to keep going, I don't know how I could, like, make the platitudes,
Well, I think all you would need to say is, I don't know how I can help you. But what I can do is ask you to call 1-800-SUICIDE, which in Alberta and BC is an actual number that works. Calgary, it's run by in Alberta, it's run by the Distress Center in Calgary. Mm-hmm. But, and a lot of other places in North America, it'll work, or call your local suicide hotline or whatever, call 911. If you don't think you can have the compassion for that person, or maybe your compassion has been burnt out for them,
I don't know, it just...
maybe they're, part of it is calling them on it and saying, well, honestly, if you feel that way, then you need to seek help, and here are the people you can call, 1-800-SUICIDE
cried
or
wolf to me
911.
too many times for me to take you seriously.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just, because, like, sometimes I wonder, like, what would happen if she actually did kill herself and I found out about it afterwards? Would my opinions change? Would my feelings about the the whole situation be different? Would I suddenly have regret about not taking her seriously, or, you know?
I would definitely caution ever, telling somebody to jump or do it already.
Well, I never did. That's just sort of my feeling.
No, I hear you.
Like, and sometimes there's a few people I know who are often talking about how miserable they are and how they should just end it already. But, it seems like it's just sort of whiny, complainy, crybaby bullshit.
Well, we used to have clients that would, like, literally, they almost had a scheduled appointment where they would call in and it would be the same story. 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, why hasn't X called? Oh, he's 5 minutes late, somebody else has got him, type of thing.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing over and over again, and that gets frustrating. But sometimes you don't know. Sometimes people just need to be heard. You don't get to judge the impact of your support on an individual. That's definitely one thing I learned at the Distress Center. I mean, if you don't feel that you have the emotional capability to do it, then definitely hand it off. But don't mock somebody for reaching out to you. And
I understand that. I'm not saying I would or have done anything like that, but I don't know. Sometimes when somebody, like when you're just talking about how it.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
I just don't have like an emotional investment in the survival of that person.
Right.
Right? Does that make sense? Like, I
Right.
don't know. Like, I don't know.
What about just compassion for a fellow human being?
Like I said, I don't know. There's too many human beings already.
Okay.
Like, the way I look at it is there's people that being a person isn't good enough sometimes. That's why we have friends, that's why we have close family members, that's why we have people we trust and care about. And we have people we don't. That some humans are more important to us than other humans are. That's a fundamental, nature of being. And I don't understand how one person can be invested or have the compassion for another person in whom they have no emotional investment, right? Does that make sense? Just because they're human, right? Just because they have 26 chromosomes or whatever it is.
Well, some people believe that, you don't have to have an emotional commitment to a person to care for them, or to be generous to them, or to assist them, right? And I mean, like I said, if that's not you, if you don't have the capacity, all you have to say is, you know what, I hear your cry for help. I don't have the capability to do that. But there are people that do. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, that kind of brings me to another question is, who are we to meddle?
Meddle? Well, if somebody's asking you for help, I don't think you're meddling.
I guess that's fair.
Right? I mean, it's not like you're walking into the Starbucks and going, hey, dude, let's talk about your life choices. Yeah. Well, okay, you might do that, but you're an exceptional person in that regard.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, we don't sit down with random people and say, I don't think that your emotional habits are healthy. It's generally people that come up to us, and
I guess that's true.
They're sharing these things with us, and you either call them on their shit or you give them advice. Or
I think the other half of the equation, though, is that in my experience, suicide has always been a threat rather than a goal.
Right.
So maybe that's how it makes it easy for me to trivialize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but it's not always. Trust me, it's not always. And sometimes it could be the 400th threat, or it could be the first threat, where that rejection leads to completion. Right? So, I would, like I said, always take it seriously.
I'd be a horrible counselor.
At least you can admit that and deflect it. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're running up on an hour, and my grandfather has come back, so it's about to get incredibly loud in here. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. I know this is kind of not an easy topic, and we didn't really plan it out or think it through. It was just something I wanted to say. I mean, there's been a lot of people asking me how I'm doing and what's going on, and there's only so much you can repeat in text messages and so much you can convey, and I appreciate the support of all my friends and listeners. I mean, a lot of our listeners are friends, but yeah, I hope that kind of gives a little more understanding. And for someone like you, Ducky, who sees the threat of suicide as an annoying threat, maybe, I don't know, maybe I've given you the opportunity to take a gentler look at it, and for people who've never really thought about the issue or have struggled with the issue, maybe there's something here that makes sense and rings true.
Well, maybe I've led a charmed life when it comes to that, because it's always a friend of a friend of a friend.
Well, suicide is always something that happens to somebody else, right? And
I've known people who've killed themselves. Like when I was younger, I had a buddy named Dathmore who he wasn't really my friend. He was a friend of one of my friends that hung out with us, and then he killed himself, and it devastated my friend, whom was his best friend, right?
Right.
But I was pretty sort of apathetic towards it, right? I was surprised. I was shocked. I was like, why? But I never really felt sort of this sense of loss or confusion or, questioning this sort of, I don't understand what happened. How could this have happened to him? I never felt any of that. And I don't know if that's just because I was one step removed from him. But I don't know. Like I said, this is a subject matter that everybody feels differently about, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a cruel, heartless bastard for feeling the way I do, or not feeling, as the case is. But I don't know. Maybe quite simply because I haven't been affected personally by it, it's hard for me to empathize with it.
Well, and it's not something like I said, we talk about on a personal level, right? Like, we've talked about death in terms of public policy.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't talk about it in terms of how it impacts us. I mean, we haven't even really talked about afterlife and everything else. I mean, you and I know where each other stand on that, and I'm pretty sure most of our audience does too. But yeah. So we haven't got into it. But I mean, that's kind of an interesting discussion to have, is traditions around death and dying, which I guess is quite separate from this. This is more suicide. Yeah. So, yeah. One of the things that one of my surviving cousins said to me today is, if you're thinking of committing suicide because you're going to be less of a burden on those around you, you're wrong. Quite obviously wrong if you've ever seen the devastation it causes to friends and family around you. And it is a cheap way out, in that you're making your friends and family, your loved ones, your survivors, do the hard emotional work that you refuse to do. In that way, you're cheating, and you're cheating them. And that's maybe not an honorable thing. So I understand where the whole idea of maybe it's just easier for everyone if I'm not here. But trust me, it's always a lot easier if you stick around.
Yeah. Besides, the same effect can be achieved by just moving and cutting all ties. You don't have to jump off a bridge.
Reboot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just buy a bus ticket, move across the country, and
become Amish.
Could do that.
Well, that's probably not very fun. They don't have TV or anything.
Well, doesn't mean they don't have fulfilling lives. Some would argue that the Amish have even better lives than those of us who are all technologically hyped up. So
there's definitely an argument to be made for that.
That's a whole nother discussion, though. So
absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to leave out with "Never Left" by Transit, and we'll see you guys next week for the feminism theme.
And they say not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And they say
monster was me. So I'm stuck and addicted to cabaret, puffing on Nicks and Alizé, living up under a rock, stuck in a shock since Timmy passed away. I don't wanna be defined as a Christian rapper. Love God, love rap, definitions don't matter. Life at its craziest, trying to find which place you fit. I tried being atheist, religion tends to make me sick. Trying to get past this Westboro Baptist, conservative, fascist, acceptance speech actress. Then there's me, equally as guilty for letting this fill me, distract me and kill me. So I'm done pointing fingers, unless it's to the sky when the beach I let them linger and they sing.
Not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And this place, not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths.
Life on the road with a mic that I hold, act like rabbit is all that I've known. My savior is up on the throne, caught his prodigal son to hurry on home. Doubters and haters to shout like the neighbors who won't stop calling me. Egging is stuck in column B, taking a song to sing is my humble apology. I'm no Solomon B, I'm harder than he. Follow the beats, I fall in the street taxology. Blessings flow on top of me, but it's overshadowed like Hallows Eve with these evil things that follow these. Father, please get rid of all of these, like an autumn breeze. In this brutal honesty, I find victory like Deuteronomy 9. Through these poverty times, my father's pottery line consists of people in the lottery line. People getting faded with the pottery climb. Got sons and daughters we find on the street with no property ties, except the hope in their eyes from mansions up in the sky. Except the hope in their eyes from mansions up in the sky. And they say,
Not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And this place, not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths.
these are the moments when heaven and earth intersect, and what happens can't be limited with earthly intellect. It seems impossible, it seems so illogical, it seems comical, it's searching for a pot of gold. But through the dark evenings I find my hope and reasoning. Jesus Christ my King, please help me breathe again. But through the dark evenings I find my hope and reasoning. Jesus Christ my King, please help me breathe again.
Not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And this place, not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And they say, not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths. And they say, not to worry, for your God is with you in the dungeon, darkness in the depths.
They say, don't let that shit be like a corset. Get you think about a Corvette. Music stimulate my prefrontal cortex. Now I record less, and see I'm more stressed. Never leave the doorstep without my cordless. You heard enemy, this is your mess. But today I'm feeling like that mess is gorgeous. 23 man time go. It went from peanut butter on a pine cone to frosted tip ski jump with a fine cone. Fat form in the ankle hoodie rhino. And I know I talk a lot about the younger days, but my inner child went ahead and ran away. Nowadays rap feels like the Hunger Games, and I've never even seen it, man, I'm overslaved. No time for movies, man, I've come of age. I used to rush the stage when I was underage. Now I hide behind my words like a summer shade. Try to slang a t-shirt against the Thunder Bay. Girlie pulling up my pants when I'm low riding. Fake smiling at jerks for their co-signing. At the bar with my right hand vice like it was Joe Biden. Now I'm slowing it down and now my soul's thriving. So praise God to be saved by grace and not message board Christians who hate my face. I got a heart for justice, I state my case, but it's hard to go and pray before I scrape my plate. Half of religion is just capitalism. It's a feeling when you figure out this castle's a prison, but this world is just falling, and since the apple is bitten, I'd rather lower my head and try and tackle the system. Prodigal son, I run to those open arms. Call it stale as I lay down these broken songs. Prodigal son, I run to those open arms. And call it stale as I lay down these broken songs.
Thank you for listening to Hardly Qualified. Remember to check the website at hardlyqualified.ca for news, updates, references, and to learn how to support the podcast. Please review and rate us in iTunes after each episode to help get the word out. If you're a Facebook user, like us and share with your friends and enemies at facebook.com/hardlyqualified, where you can also join in on the conversation. A special thanks to the artists who have donated music to the podcast. We greatly appreciate your work. As always, artists may be found in each episode's reference section. Again, thanks for listening, and remember, knowledge starts with questions. Don't fear them. We'll see you next week.